What happens when Hollywood's most outspoken star meets television's most relentless interrogator? You're about to witness one of the most explosive morning television moments ever captured on live TV. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story is about to get wild. Mark Wahlberg walked into the Good Morning America studio that morning expecting a routine promotional interview for his latest action thriller. What he got instead was George Stephanopoulos in full prosecutor mode, armed with questions that had nothing to do with movies and everything to do with controversy. "Mark, welcome back to Good Morning America," Stephanopoulos said with that signature tight smile that never quite reached his eyes. The camera captured Wahlberg settling into the guest chair, his usual confident demeanor intact, though something in his posture suggested he sensed the unusual energy in the room. "Thanks for having me, George. Always good to be here," Wahlberg replied, straightening his jacket and flashing that trademark Boston charm that had carried him through countless interviews over the years. But Stephanopoulos wasn't interested in pleasantries. He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on that prosecutorial edge that had made him famous in political circles long before he became a morning show host. "Let's talk about your past, Mark. Specifically, let's talk about the incidents from your youth that some people say you've never truly addressed properly." The shift in Wahlberg's expression was immediate and unmistakable. His jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed as he processed what was happening. This wasn't going to be about his new movie, his fitness routine, or his family life. This was an ambush. "George, I thought we were here to talk about my new film," Wahlberg said, his voice remaining controlled, but with an undertone that suggested storm clouds gathering. "I've addressed those issues from my past many times over the years. I was a kid who made terrible mistakes, and I've spent my entire adult life trying to make amends for them." Stephanopoulos pressed on, consulting his notes with theatrical precision. "But Mark, don't you think that simply saying you've addressed them isn't enough? These weren't just teenage pranks these were serious incidents that affected real people's lives. Don't you think the public deserves more than just your standard apology tour?" The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators exchanged glances and you could see the producers in the background shifting nervously. This was live television and it was going sideways fast. Wahlberg's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles beginning to show white. "George, with all due respect, I've been open about my past mistakes for decades. I've worked with victims, I've supported community programs, I've tried every single day to be better than I was as a stupid kid. What exactly are you looking for here?" "I'm looking for accountability," Mark Stephanopoulos shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Real accountability, not just the sanitized version you give in press junkets. These weren't just mistakes, they were crimes, and some people feel like Hollywood has just let you sweep them under the rug because you became a movie star." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Wahlberg's face flushed red, and for a moment the carefully constructed public persona cracked, revealing the street fighter from Dorchester underneath the Hollywood Polish. "Sweep them under the rug." Wahlberg's voice was getting louder now, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced as his emotions peaked. "George, I've never hidden from what I did. I was 17 years old, high out of my mind, and I did terrible things. But I served my time. I changed my life, and I've spent 30 years proving that I'm not that person anymore. What more do you want from me?" Stephanopoulos, since blood in the water, and doubled down. "But Mark, serving 45 days in jail for what you did, some people would say that's hardly justice. And now, here you are worth hundreds of millions of dollars living in a mansion while your victims they're still dealing with the trauma you caused. How do you reconcile that?" The question was a direct hit, and everyone in the studio knew it. Wahlberg's face went through a rapid series of expressions: anger, frustration, disbelief, and something that looked dangerously close to rage. The cameras caught it all in high definition, broadcasting this personal crisis to millions of viewers across the country. "You know what?" George Wahlberg said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that somehow felt more threatening than if he had been shouting. "I came here in good faith to talk about a movie that employs hundreds of people, that entertains millions of people, and you want to put me on trial for things I did when I was a teenager, things I've apologized for countless times, things I've tried to make right in every way I know how." The morning show host Cincy had his guest exactly where he wanted him. This was compelling television, the kind of unscripted drama that morning shows dreamed of. Stephanopoulos leaned back in his chair with the satisfied look of a prosecutor who had just delivered a devastating cross-examination. "But Mark, shouldn't public figures be held to a higher standard? Shouldn't there be ongoing consequences for serious crimes, even if they happened years ago? Your victims don't get to just move on and forget, so why should you?" That was the moment when Mark Wahlberg's legendary temper finally broke through the carefully maintained media training that had served him for decades in Hollywood. Wahlberg shot up from his chair so fast that it rolled backwards several feet, the sudden movement causing everyone in the studio to freeze. His face was now completely red, veins visible on his forehead, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Are you out of your mind?" Wahlberg exploded, his voice echoing through the studio with such force that several crew members actually took steps backward. "Higher standard. I've been holding myself to the highest possible standard for 30 years. I've donated millions of dollars. I've worked with at-risk kids. I've tried to be a role model for people who came from where I came from." Stephanopoulos remained seated, but his body language suggested he was ready to bolt if necessary. Still, his journalistic instincts kicked in, and he pressed forward, despite the obvious danger of the situation escalating further. "But Mark, donations and charity work, isn't that just buying your way out of real accountability? Money doesn't erase what happened to those people. It doesn't heal their trauma or give them back what you took from them." "What I took from them?" Wahlberg's voice cracked with incredulous rage. "George, I was a strung-out kid from a broken home. I was 17 years old, addicted to cocaine, living on the streets half the time. You think I had some master plan to hurt people? You think I wasn't hurting just as much as anyone else?" The morning show host saw his opening and went for the kill shot. "But Mark, that's exactly the problem. You're still making excuses. You're still playing the victim. Your childhood, your addiction, your circumstances. None of that changes what you did to innocent people. And frankly, sitting here listening to you blame everything except yourself, it makes me wonder if you've really changed at all." The accusation hit Wahlberg like a physical blow. His face went from red to white in seconds, and for a moment, he looked genuinely stunned. The suggestion that he hadn't really changed, that his entire adult life had been meaningless, seemed to cut deeper than anything else Stephanopoulos had thrown at him. "You wonder if I've changed." Wahlberg's voice was now barely above a whisper, but somehow more menacing than when he had been shouting. "George, do you have any idea what I've been through to become the person I am today? Do you have any clue what it's like to wake up every single day knowing that you hurt people when you were at your lowest point?" Stephanopoulos sensed he had touched a nerve, and like any experienced interrogator, he pressed his advantage. "Then, tell us, Mark, tell us what it's really like. Stop giving us the sanitized Hollywood version and tell America what you really think about what you did. You want the real version." Wahlberg began pacing behind his chair now, his entire body radiating aggressive energy that had everyone in the studio on edge. "Fine, here's the real version. George, I was 17 years old, completely messed up on drugs, angry at the entire world, and I did something unforgivable. I attacked innocent people because I was too high and too stupid and too angry to think about anyone but myself." The admission seemed to surprise even Stephanopoulos, who had clearly expected more deflection, but Wahlberg wasn't finished. "And you know what the worst part is, George? It's not the jail time. It's not the public shame. It's not even the damage to my career. The worst part is knowing that somewhere out there are people who still carry scars from what I did. Physical scars, emotional scars, scars that never fully heal. And no amount of money, no amount of apologies, no amount of good works will ever completely erase that." For a brief moment, the studio fell silent. Even Stephanopoulos seemed momentarily disarmed by the raw honesty in Wahlberg's voice. But the moment of vulnerability didn't last long. "Then why, Mark?" Stephanopoulos continued relentlessly. "Why haven't you reached out directly to your victims? Why haven't you made personal amends instead of just doing charity work and giving interviews?" That question caused something to snap in Wahlberg's demeanor. His brief moment of openness vanished, replaced by a cold fury that was somehow more frightening than his earlier explosion. "Because George," Wahlberg said, each word precisely enunciated and dripping with contempt, "my lawyers, my publicists, my agents, and every other person who gets paid to protect me from people like you have spent decades telling me that reaching out directly could open me up to lawsuits, harassment, and exploitation by people who want to profit from my guilt." Stephanopoulos pounced on the admission like a cat on a mouse. "So, you're saying your team has actively prevented you from making real amends, that Hollywood has essentially protected you from facing the full consequences of your actions?" "No, that's not what I'm saying at all." Wahlberg slammed his hand down on the arm of his chair so hard that the sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot. "I'm saying that in a world where everything gets turned into a lawsuit or a media circus, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people you've hurt is leave them alone." The morning show host leaned forward, sensing that he had his guest exactly where he wanted him. This was the kind of combative television that would have people talking for weeks, and Stephanopoulos was clearly enjoying every second of it. "But Mark, doesn't that just sound like another excuse? Another way of avoiding real accountability? You're basically saying that your comfort and legal protection are more important than your victim's need for closure." Wahlberg's face went through another rapid transformation, this time settling into an expression of pure, undiluted rage. His voice, when he spoke, was low and dangerous in a way that suggested years of barely controlled anger, finally breaking free. "My comfort," he said, taking a step toward Stephanopoulos' desk. "George, you have no idea what you're talking about." The security personnel stationed around the studio had moved closer now, clearly ready to intervene if the situation escalated any further. Wahlberg noticed their movement and let out a bitter laugh that contained no humor whatsoever. "Oh, this is rich, George. Now you've got security ready to throw me out because I'm telling you the truth about how messed up this whole situation is. You want to talk about comfort? Let me tell you about comfort. Comfort would be never having to think about the worst day of my life ever again. Comfort would be being able to sleep through the night without wondering if I've done enough to make up for being a complete disaster as a teenager." Stephanopoulos wasn't backing down, even with the palpable tension filling the studio. If anything, he seemed energized by the conflict, his journalistic instincts overriding any concern for personal safety. "But Mark, that's exactly my point. You're still making this about your feelings, your guilt, your sleepless nights. What about their sleepless nights? What about their trauma? Why should anyone care about your comfort when you're the one who caused all this pain in the first place?" That question pushed Wahlberg past his breaking point. He began moving around the studio space like a caged animal, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke, his voice rising and falling with uncontrolled emotion. "You know what, George, you're absolutely right. Nobody should care about my comfort. Nobody should care about my feelings. And you know what else? Nobody should have to sit here and listen to some privileged talking head who's never made a real mistake in his entire sanitized life lecture me about accountability." The insult hit its mark. Stephanopoulos' composed facade cracked slightly, and his voice took on a sharper edge than before. "Privileged talking head. Mark, I'm not the one who committed violent crimes and then became a millionaire movie star. I'm not the one who spent decades avoiding real consequences for serious actions, and I'm certainly not the one having a public meltdown on live television because someone asked me tough questions." Tough questions. Wahlberg whirled around too, faced the host directly, his entire body language screaming aggression. "George, these aren't tough questions. This is a hit job. You brought me here under false pretenses, ambushed me with decades-old issues that have nothing to do with why I'm supposed to be here. And now you're acting like some crusading journalist because you managed to get me angry." Stephanopoulos stood up from his desk now, matching aggressive posture. The two men faced each other across the studio. The tension's so thick you could cut it with a knife. "False pretenses. Mark, you're a public figure who committed serious crimes. That makes your past fair game for any interview, anywhere, anytime. If you can't handle being asked about it, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews at all." "Maybe I shouldn't," Wahlberg shot back. "Maybe I should just disappear from public life entirely so people like you can't use my past mistakes to boost your ratings. Would that make you happy, George? Would that satisfy your need for justice?" The morning show host sensed he had pushed his guest to the absolute limit. But instead of pulling back, he decided to go for one final devastating blow. "What would make me happy, Mark, is if you showed some real remorse instead of just anger. What would satisfy my need for justice is if you took full responsibility without making excuses or blaming everyone else for your problems. But clearly, that's never going to happen." The accusation that he hadn't shown real remorse was apparently the final straw for Wahlberg. His face contorted with rage, and he began moving toward Stephanopoulos' desk with clear, aggressive intent. "Real remorse. You want to see real remorse? George, every single day of my life is real remorse. Every single choice I make is filtered through the knowledge that I hurt people when I was 17 years old. I can't take back what I did. I can't undo the pain I caused. And I sure as hell can't satisfy people like you who want to use my guilt as entertainment." By now, the security personnel were actively moving toward the two men and production. Assistants were frantically signaling to the control room. This was live television spiraling completely out of control, and everyone knew it. Stephanopoulos, perhaps finally realizing he had pushed too far, took a step back from his desk. But his voice remained challenging, even as his body language suggested he was preparing for a possible physical confrontation. "Mark, I think you need to calm down. This is a family show, and your behavior right now is completely inappropriate. If you can't control yourself, perhaps you should leave." "Oh, now I need to leave." Wahlberg's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Now that you've gotten your ratings grab, now that you've humiliated me on national television, now I need to leave. You're unbelievable, George, you're absolutely unbelievable. Security, please escort Mr. Wahlberg from the studio." Stephanopoulos called out, his voice carrying clearly across the space. "This interview is over." The words seemed to hit Wahlberg like a physical blow. He stopped moving and stood perfectly still for a moment, processing what had just happened. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but filled with a cold fury that was somehow more intimidating than all his previous shouting. "You know what, George? You got exactly what you wanted. You got your viral moment. You got your controversy. You got your headlines. But let me tell you something that your research team probably didn't dig up. The person I hurt the worst all those years ago wasn't some random stranger on the street. It was myself, and people like you make sure I never forget it. As security moved in to escort him out, Wahlberg pulled off his wireless microphone and tossed it onto the desk with a gesture of complete disgust. "Congratulations on your journalism, George. I'm sure you're very proud." And with that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving behind one of the most explosive morning television moments in recent memory. The cameras kept rolling as Stephanopoulos attempted to regain his composure and transition to commercial, but the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to promote a movie had instead created a media firestorm that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Do you believe Wahlberg was justified in his anger, or did Stephanopoulos ask the tough questions that needed to be asked? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this.